Why is there still that big divide between the WSL and the Championship and below?
Oh, I'm not. I think it's just basically money, essentially. Like the WSL has got funds, like the women. A lot of the women's teams also train at the grounds that the men train at. So, like, I know Everton women train at Finch Farm. Arsenal women train at the men's ground as well. Man City have this absolutely brilliant facility that both teams train at. Chelsea have the exact same. Um, Derby women train at like the Pride Park facilities. Uh, wherever, oh, I can't remember off the top of my head where Derby is, but they train there, but it's only for like twice a week. It's Tuesday and a Thursday for about 4 hours. So they just don't have the training facilities. They don't have the times to train. They only train twice, maybe even 3 times a week. They only play once on a Sunday. They often have to fund like their own travel for away games as well. So like they'll like car share and stuff like that if they don't get coaches provided. And it's just such the lack of funding and money for all the lower league teams because some of the teams aren't even bad. Like Wolves women are probably one of the best in the Northern League, and they definitely held Brighton. They just don't have the funding or facilities to be able to like beat them or get further, which is a real shame because some of these teams are ridiculously good. And they get the crowds in as well. Like last season at the Forest Ground for the West Midlands Derby, Forest women and Derby women, they got like 5,000 people in, which is like, I mean, it's not many when you think of how many can fit, how many have like sold out the Emirates and that sort of thing. But for that league, that's absolutely huge. Like for getting the crowds, we just don't have the funding per se.
I mean, I've got a sneaky feeling that you might have an opinion on this, but Paul, what do you think can be done to sort of remedy that difference? Is there anything that the FA can do to support sort of distribution of funding, or do you think it just needs time to grow and develop?
Um, I don't think it's on the FA, and I'm not necessarily sure it's on the teams because sometimes you have situations like we were talking about Beth Merrick for Wolves earlier. Um, Most of the Wolves team played for Coventry United at some point, so I know them like Beth Merrick, Amber Hughes, Destiny Toussaint, Helen Dermody. They all played for Coventry United. Beth Merrick was offered a full-time contract in the brief period where Coventry United did go fully professional, but didn't take it up because even with a full-time contract at the time, she'd have been paid more for her day job of working as a teacher. And this is where the problem is. For the vast majority of teams, they don't need to invest because they almost look at it and go, well, we're always going to be outpaid by the top three teams, and most media coverage and everything only cares about the top three teams. I mean, like for the TV games that have come out in the WSL, the Merseyside Derby at Goodison Park isn't on telly because we're seeing for the 15th time this season Arsenal, Chelsea, and Manchester City. To be fair, Manchester City are in the Manchester Derby, so you can justify that one. But I look at it, and the coverage is so skewed, and this is a media thing. Like genuinely, as far as the media seems to be concerned, there's only three teams, so that's where all the money is going, and that's where they have all the incentive to invest. I mean, you're just in a situation now where almost you need a squad wage cap in the WSL, and you say, right, um, you can spend, let's say, £4 million a year on a squad of 20 players, but you have to have a minimum wage. Every player has to be paid at least the average living wage in the UK, which is £25,000 a year. And then let's face it, most teams in the top three tiers that are linked to men's clubs can probably afford to pay their women £25,000 a year. You're not telling me, for example, Nottingham Forest can't afford to pay their women's squad an average of £25,000 a year when most Premier League teams are paying even their fringe youth players that a week. And I think at this point you're right. Maybe there is something the FA can do, or new code when they take over the championship. But it would be a radical case of saying, right, okay, we are going to cap spending on squads as a whole in order to make it more attractive for teams to invest in, more competitive. So, almost force parity. But at the same time, we're going to impose a wage floor so that if players want to play full time, clubs have to commit to it. And I think that then you'd see talent that's currently perhaps getting lost or almost not playing well being told, right, okay, if we commit, if we're paying these players this amount of money, we should commit to also having them training 4 or 5 times a week. We should also commit to giving them the same facilities as the men. We should also commit to giving them the same promotion as the men. And I think the way you force and the way you close the gap is by perhaps capping the top level for a little while, so the big teams can't run away. The games are more competitive, and there's more. The lower teams are almost getting more for their money, but while the players are still getting a decent amount of money.
Yeah, so I mean, it is a financial parity thing that needs to be remedied, and I think the WSL and the Championship probably still at that level where they're not developed far enough down the line. I mean, you try to introduce that into the Premier League now, for example, in the men's game, and you wouldn't be able to do that because there's so many long-term contracts on so much money. It would just decimate the league. It just wouldn't be possible. But I think, I mean, do you feel? I mean, Freya, do you think that the WSL and the Championship are at a point where they could introduce some sort of limits and cappings, a bit like that they do in the American leagues, where you've got an upper echelon, you've got a lower echelon that can sort of level that out, but also introduce at the same time, whereas like Luton this year, and they got promoted to the Premier League, had to improve their ground, for example. So you could set a criteria to say you need to have a minimum of training facilities, something else, and this barrier. I mean, Freya, do you think that would work?
It would, but again, that comes down to if they are linked to the men's team, because some women's clubs still aren't, so they're pretty much on their own. But then if they've got the backing of the men's team, if those restrictions were put into place, okay, well, how are they going to fund that? So I think I agree with everything that's been mentioned, but there needs to be so much standardization across the board in the women's game in general that I think it just needs. That's why I'm excited for this new code to come in actually and see what they're going to do and how they're going to revolutionize the leagues. Because when you look at even the top and bottom of the WSL, the top have had a chance to run away with it. And it's literally top 3 or 4 versus the middle lot, and then a couple at the bottom. So it's really hard to be able to compete when you physically can't. So I think if there was that cap, then at least you've got a chance. Whereas at the minute, I think most teams would go up against Chelsea and go, we're going to try, but it's probably not going to work out very well. So I think, and even in the Championship, you turn up at some of the grounds, and even Aston Villa, the Bescott Stadium isn't the best if you've ever been. But you just think, well, if that's the value of the top flight of the WSL, then how are the lower leagues being treated as well? So I think it is that investment, but it's where that's going to come from. And unfortunately, the people who hold all the answers, if they're willing to do it, if they think it's worth it. And that's the big fight.